Hello once again, this is Jeff Scott of Rankin Technical College. I've been going over Web Development and Design Foundations with HTML 7th edition, the textbook by Terry Felk Morris, and in particular I've been going over the PowerPoints. And I'm up to Chapter 11 out of 14, and Chapter 11, which starts in our textbook on page 457, is entitled Web Multimedia and Interactivity. You can see our objectives here. We want to describe the purpose of plugins, helper applications, media containers, and codecs, describe types of multimedia files used on the web, configure hyperlinks to multimedia files, configure audio and video on a web page with HTML5 elements, describe features and common uses of Adobe Flash, JavaScript, Java applets, Ajax, and jQuery, configure a Flash animation on a web page, configure a Java applet on a web page, create an interactive image gallery with CSS, configure the CSS transform and transition properties, and finally describe the purpose of geolocation, web storage, offline web applications, and Canvas HTML5 APIs. Just so you know, one of the reasons that HTML5 even came to be is the fact that there's such a non-standardization in the way that audio and video is done. So the hope is that over time there will be more of a standardization by the use of HTML5 tags. So that's what a lot of this chapter is about. The first thing that's discussed in here are helper applications and plugins. Now the author defines a helper application as a program designed to handle a particular type of file to allow a user to view or otherwise utilize a special file. All right. So for instance, they give you a couple of these things here, but I utilize, for these tape recordings that I'm making or these video recordings, I utilize a product called Camtasia. And with Camtasia, I'm able to create files and save them in a .mp4 format. And what that does is once they get put up on YouTube, you hear my voice and you see the screen from the computer. All right, a helper application runs in a separate window from the browser. A plugin is a newer and more common method. It runs right in the browser window so that media objects can be integrated directly into your web page. So some of the common plugins are shown on page 458, and they include Adobe Flash, Adobe Shockwave, Adobe Reader, the Java Runtime Environment, Windows Media Player, and Apple QuickTime. A couple things about that. You'll notice that the first one that's in there is Flash. And a few years ago, Apple decided they weren't going to support Flash anymore. That's when all this kind of stuff really started. The fact that the people said we have to have a common way to work on this stuff together. All right. On the bottom of page 458, they talk about containers and they talk about codecs. And then they show some examples of audio and video file types on page 459. So as it says, a container contains the media and the metadata. So its metadata is data about data. And the codec is the algorithm that's used to compress the media. All right. Well, if you look at, for example, at table 11.1, you'll notice that there are a lot of different audio file types, in particular probably about 5 or 6. And then there's about 6 or 7 or 8, I don't know, video file types at the bottom of the page. And again, the problem is not all browsers support all of these different types, but ideally in the future, all will. All right. So HTML5 audio and video. As it says, native to the browser, but there's the problem. Browsers do not all support the same codecs. Already showed you that or told you that about the commonly used plugins. Here are some audio file types. Here are some video file types, and you can notice, for instance, the .mp4 that's in there. Again, that's what I'm using. Notice with copyright issues, only publish web pages, images, and other media that you have personally created or that you have obtained the rights or license to use. In other words, don't just sit there and grab stuff that someone else has put on a web page, copy it to your web page, and start using it. Do not do that. Ask for written permission. I believe that the way that it works, that if you can get somebody to send you an email granting you permission, I believe that that is considered to be legal in terms of you can do it that way. All work are automatically copyrighted, even if there's not a copyright mark or date. So in other words, if I created something, put it out there on the web, and somebody else grabbed it and started using the same material and claimed that it was theirs, I probably would have a right to seek damages or whatever against them. All right? Now, one of the things that's talked about in here is this idea of Creative Commons. And they say there that it's a new approach to copyright. And to be honest with you, I'm not sure what it is, so I'm looking in the book here. And let's look. Page 472. All right. Some individuals may want to retain ownership of their work but make it easy for others to adapt or use it. Creative Commons, which is at http://creativecommons.org, provides a free service that allows authors and artists to register a type of copyright license called a Creative Commons license. There are several to choose from, depending on the rights you wish to grant as the author. The Creative Commons license informs others exactly what they can and cannot do with their creative work. So when in doubt, that would be a good place to start. All right. Getting started with audio and video on page 460, the easiest way to access an audio or a video file is to just put a hyperlink. All right, and where you are linking to it. So notice in this case, they're linking to a podcast. All right, if you don't know what a podcast is, basically it is an audio file. All right, and they do mention on page 461, there are 3 basic steps to creating a podcast. First, you record it. Second, you upload it to wherever it's going to be. And then third, you make it available. Now, notice with accessibility, one of the things they talk about here is providing alternate content. If you have someone who has sight but doesn't have hearing, then the world's best podcast probably isn't going to do them much good. But more and more, as podcasts and things like that are being created, they're being created with, I can't even think of the word right now, but on the bottom, with closed captioning on the bottom for video. Now, for audio, that's not going to help. So for audio, as it says, you might want to provide a transcript. Okay, working with multimedia on the web. Before we get into what's shown on the screen there, there's a number of ways that you can obtain audio files. You can create your own. You can buy them. There are some that are out there for free. And Lupasonic, which is at lupasonic.com, and freeaudioclips.com. There are a couple, but even when you grab stuff for free, I would definitely go look through it, because sometimes it's free, but you have to either link to their site or reference their site or give some kind of accolades for the person who did it. All right. They do mention on page 462, they talk about a sampling rate as being a value related to the number of digital samples taken per second. And I believe the higher the sampling rate, the better the quality is going to be. All right, that's for audio. For video, it's the same kind of thing. You can create your own video files, you can download videos, you can purchase DVDs, etc. But you run into the same kind of issues. You have to make sure that if you are taking work that somebody else has created, that you provide documentation or you provide whatever they want you to provide. All right. And again, you must provide alternate content for media files on the website in maybe the form of a transcript or a PDF or something else. All right. There may be issues, playback issues, with audio and or video files on different browsers just because of the fact that, as we mentioned before, there is not currently an agreed to format for all audio and video files. All right, so what is Adobe Flash? It's an application that can be used to add interest and interactivity to web pages by doing all sorts of different multimedia things. Slideshows, animation, audio, video, etc. Flash media files are stored with a .swif extension. The Flash Player, as it says, is a free browser plugin, but notice it's not well supported on mobile devices. And I mentioned Apple. To my knowledge, Apple doesn't support Flash for anything. I could be wrong on that, but that's at least what I had read. All right, the HTML5 embed element is a self-contained element or a void element. The purpose of it is to provide a container for external content like Flash that requires a plugin or a player. The embed element, was never an official W3C element until HTML5. Now, the different attributes that are used for it are shown, most of them are shown here. Of course, you need the source file, which is the name, in this case, of the Flash file you'd be using. The height specifies the height of the object in pixels. The width of the object in pixels. All right, the type, which isn't shown on here, but you can put the MIME type in there, and you say type equals application dash x slash shockwave slash, and those slashes are dashes, Flash. All right, the BG color, if you use that, is the background color. It's optional. It's a hex value you use for the background color. The quality is optional, and it describes the quality of the media. Normally you set it to high because you want the best quality available. All right, the title is optional. It specifies a brief text description that may be displayed by browsers and other assistive technology. And the last thing that's in there is the V mode, which again is optional and it's not shown on here. It's set to transparent to configure a transparent background in supporting browsers. All right, so there is a hands-on practice to go through this on the bottom of page 464 and going on to page 465. Now, there are many sources of free Flash animation and Flash tutorials on the web. If you go to flashkit.com, scriptocean.com, and kirupa.com, Kirupa.com. All right. On the bottom of page 465, there's an FAQ there. It says, what's Microsoft Silverlight? In many ways, Silverlight is Microsoft's attempt at an alternative to Flash. It's a tool for delivering media experiences. All right, and I've used it before. I've actually, many years ago, taught a class in Silverlight. Okay, what happens if the browser my web page visitor uses does not support Flash? Typically, the browser will display a message about the need for the missing plugin. All right, that's usually at least how it's going to be handled. All right, turning to page 466, HTML5 audio and video elements. All right, the new HTML5 audio and video elements are used to allow browsers to natively play files without the need for browser plugins. That, again, is one of the biggest reasons HTML5 even came to be. When they talk about this stuff, the container is designated by the file extension, and the codec, again, is the algorithm to compress the media. We already looked at that a little bit earlier. The HTML5 audio element, which you see right here, supports native play of audio files in the browser without the need for plugins or players, which means by putting that in, or something like what you see on the screen right here into your HTML, this stuff here, you're going to get something like this, which is going to add the ability for you to bring up audio right on your page. You'll need to supply multiple versions of the file because different codecs support different file types. At a minimum, you'll probably need at least 2 different types of these containers, which are the OGG and MP3. It's typical to omit the source and type attributes from the audio tag and rather configure multiple versions within the source element. And that's what they're showing you right here. It's a great example. The source element that you see there, it's a self-contained element that specifies a media file and a MIME type. So notice you've got soundloop.mp3 and you've got soundloop.ogg. So for the example, which is also shown on the bottom of page 467 in your book, it configures the web file that's shown on the page. There is a hands-on practice with this that is on the middle of page 468. All right, good FAQ on page 469. The top of the page, how can I convert an audio file to the OGG Vorbis codec? It says the open source Audacity application supports OGG Vorbis. And it gives you a URL, http://audacity.sourceforge.net for download information. If you're looking for a free web-based converter, you can upload and share an audio file at the Internet Archive, which is at archive.org, and an OGG file format will automatically be generated. So the point is, you can't just grab a file if you have one. So let's say that there I had a file that was called soundloop.mp3. Don't just make a copy of it and change the extension to .ogg and assume that it will work. All right. Look online for tools that will do the conversion for you. All right. Next is the video element, which starts on the middle of page 469. Again, like the audio element, the new HTML5 video element supports native play, but this time of video files. Again, without the need for plugins or players. Some of the elements are shown on the screen here and in table 11.5 that's on page 469. The source src, if you use that, you can see it here. It's optional. It's the video file name. The type is the MIME type. And you're going to use something like they show there, like video-mp4 or video-ogg. Autoplay is optional. It indicates whether the video should start playing automatically. Controls are optional, and they indicate whether controls should be displayed. It's recommended that you have those. That's the controls that you see right here that will allow you to pause, play with the volume, and make full screen. Height and width are both optional, and they're the height in pixels or the width in pixels. Loop is optional, and it indicates whether the video will play over and over again. Poster is optional, and what that'll typically do is specify some kind of an image to display if the browser cannot play the video. Preload is optional, and the values are none, which is no preload, metadata, which means only download media file metadata, and auto, which means to download the media file. And there's title, which is optional and specifies a brief text description that can be displayed by browsers and other assisted technology. Again, like we saw with the audio, the source element is self-contained or void, and it specifies a media file and a MIME type. So the example that you see on your screen is the same one that they show on page 470. And after that example is a hands-on practice on the bottom of page 470 and the top of page 471, which will give you even more information if you're interested regarding this. Another good FAQ on the middle of page 471. How can I convert a video file to the new codecs? You can use Firefog, which is at firefog, firefogg.org, to convert a video file to the OGG Theora codec. And there's other ones that are mentioned in there also. All right. Before we get into the image gallery, which starts on page 472, just a quick word again about multimedia files and copyright law. There are times when students and educators can use portions of someone else's work and they're not in violation of the copy law. That's called fair use. So the idea is, if I found something really cool on a web page and I used it in the classroom, not to make any kind of money, but to possibly to illustrate a very good use of something, okay, then typically that's considered fair use. The use must be educational and not commercial. The nature of the work copied should be factual and not creative. The amount copied should be as small as possible. Typically, if you've never heard this before, I have never done this, but I have heard in the past that, for example, as a teacher, I can copy up to 10% of a book. So if I found a really good, well, this book we have here has got 675 pages. So if I wasn't going to use the book, I could actually make copies of about 68 pages of the book. I don't do that, but I know people who do. Also, the copy should not impede the marketability of the original work. All right, and then they talk again on 472, that was that Creative Commons that we mentioned earlier. All right, so CSS and interactivity. So we're changing it around a little bit in the middle of page 472 here. They're talking about a CSS image gallery. And what you see on your screen right here is an image gallery. So the idea is you can click any one of these thumbnails and then you get a bigger picture over here. Notice they've clicked that one and there's the picture. Again, place the mouse over the thumbnail and a larger image will be displayed. So there's a hands-on practice for this on the bottom of page 472, all of page 473, and most of page 474. There's nothing special about calling that gallery either. That's just what they decided to call it because typically that's what it's known as. All right, a couple more things with CSS. CSS provides transforms, which allow you to change the display of an element and provide functions to rotate and skew, etc. You may or may not be able to tell. This looks like it's tilted right here. And again, typically when you do things like that, they're done for effect. You can do both two-dimensional and three-dimensional transforms. And it's used, and it's supported by a lot of different browsers. But you may need to code multiple style declarations in order to be able to use it. And that's what's shown here. I've mentioned this before, but I want to say it again. Okay, right now, the minus WebKit, this right here, the WebKit engine is what is used to kind of support, for lack of better words, both Chrome and Safari. So that'll handle Chrome and Safari. The Moz is short for Mozilla, which is Firefox. The O is for Opera, and the MS is for Microsoft. The idea is over time, you have to say all these right now, but over time, you'll be able to remove all those because they'll all basically adhere to the same standard, which is this one. So you normally include, if you have any doubt, you put in all of the declarations for each of the major browsers, and then you put one without any stuff at the end. And notice it's minus WebKit minus transform, minus Moz minus transform, minus O minus transform, no spaces, minus S minus transform, etc. On page 475, they have a table there that goes through the values of the transform property. And they are rotate, which rotates the element by the angle specified in degrees, scale, which scales or resizes the element along the X and Y axis, scale X, which scales or resizes along the X axis, scale Y, which scales or resizes along the Y axis, skew X, which distorts the display of the element along the X axis, skew Y, which distorts the display of the element along the Y axis, translate, which repositions the element along the X and Y axis, translate X, which just repositions along the X axis, and translate Y, which repositions rather along the y-axis. So not only, this transform also has a rotate function that takes a value in degrees that allows you to rotate. And there is a hands-on practice on the bottom of 475 and the first half of the page on 476, which will give you more information if you are interested. CSS also provides a transition property to provide for changes in property values to display smoother manner over time. All right, what we're getting to here is almost the act of animation, where you're able to move things around to give them a different look and feel. All right, you can see the transition stuff there. And notice again, it's done in a very similar way in that you put in the WebKit, the Moz, etc. Again, as we talked about before, you might want to go over to caniuse.com to see exactly which browsers support this. There is another hands-on practice for this on 477 and 478, and yet another practice on 478, 479, and 480. All right, what is Java? We're not talking JavaScript here. We're talking the word Java. Java is a programming language. In particular, it's an object-oriented programming language. When you work with Java, you can create two different things. You can create what are referred to as standalone applications. So I could create, for example, an entire payroll system if I wanted to do so in Java. Or you can create applets in Java. And an applet is literally invoked by a web page. Now, although Java was developed by Sun Microsystems, years ago Sun Microsystems was bought out by Oracle. So Oracle, which is known as one of the biggest relational database management systems in the world, Oracle owns Oracle, they own Java, and they also own MySQL, which is another, it's open source, but it's another well-known relational database management system. Java is a very powerful language. You can use it to do a lot of different things. I don't expect this to make a lot of sense to you. What happens with most programming languages is most programming languages interpret and then they compile. Java's a little different in that it compiles into a class file, then it interprets. And a lot of the work that's done for this is done by something called the JVM, the Java Virtual Machine. And literally, probably for about the last, if you bought a computer within the last 15 years, the chances are almost 100%, if it's be it a laptop or whatever, that you probably have the JVM on your machine, whether you know it or realize it or not, even if you've never used it or never will use it. Now, if you want to add a Java applet to a page, you'll notice that it's not a small task. They mention in there that the applet element is obsolete, which means it's being deprecated. You shouldn't use it. But on the other hand, the HTML5 has the object element. And notice all the different stuff that you have to put in there. All right. Some of the things that go along with this are the type that specifies the MIME type. And that's going to be set for a Java applet to application -x or /x -java-applet. The height, which specifies the height of the applet in pixels. The width, which specifies the width of the applet in pixels, and the title, which is an optional brief description that may be displayed by browsers and assistive technology. Then you work with these parameters that are in here, and these parameters are configured with what's called the param or param element, and that's a void element that has two attributes, a name and a value. Some of the examples are shown here. All right, you've got code, and the value is fader.26.class. So there once was a program that was called fader26.java. That program was compiled into fader26.class, and that class file is what's going to be used for the applet. There's message, which is the text to be displayed by the Java applet. There's text color, which is the color of the text to be displayed by the applet. And there's back color for the background color. All right, there are a lot of different Java resources out there, and they give you a couple of them right there. If you want to learn about applets, JavaOnTheBrain.com and EchoEcho.com. I would also say that if you want to learn more about Java, so if you want to learn more about the language, the programming language itself, now I'm going to put an address in here, but it's going to push me to someplace else. Back when this was owned by Sun Microsystems, you could type in java.sun.com because it was Sun Microsystems. But if you put in now java.sun.com, it pushes you off rather to oracle.com/technetwork/java/index. But the point is, all your downloads, all of what are called your APIs or your application program interface, all of your information is out on the site right here. Unlike Java, which is an object-oriented programming language, you've got JavaScript, which we're going to be talking about in Chapter 14 of the book. And whereas Java is an object-oriented programming language, meaning you have to use objects in everything you do, JavaScript is what's known as an object-based programming language. What that means is that you do have available to you object-oriented. You can write object-oriented JavaScript, but you don't have to. All right. JavaScript, as it says there, manipulates objects associated with a web page document, like a window object, a document object, and there's a lot more. Originally, JavaScript was developed by Netscape. It was originally called LiveScript. All right. It was renamed. They actually went over to Sun Microsystems when they were introducing Java, and they tried to kind of jump on it. And they asked if they could change it from LiveScript to JavaScript, and they were given permission to do so. But it's not Java. Good FAQ on the bottom of page 483. The author says, don't all browsers support Java? The answer is most modern browsers do, but it is possible. It is possible to, in JavaScript, to turn off JavaScript. All right, some people think it's evil. All right. Here are some common uses of JavaScript. I'm not going to go over any of those right now. You are going to see them as we get going. You'll have to take my word for it. All right. JavaScript also allows you to manipulate something that's called the DOM. The DOM is the Document Object Model. This is something that literally gets created for you behind the scenes for every web page that gets created. A DOM object gets created. And unlike, well, let's put it this way. If you can learn to manipulate the DOM, there's not much on a web page you're not going to be able to do. All right, a lot of JavaScript tutorials out there. W3 Schools has got a great one. WebTeacher.com has got one called JavaScript for the Total Non-Programmer. And EchoEcho.com has got good tutorials out there too. Next is Ajax. And if you've never seen a site like this before, I'm going to give you an example, my example of Ajax. I don't know how good it is, but I'm going to go out to familyvideo.net, or .com, I should say, familyvideo.com. And underneath there, I'm going to find their new releases. There they are, new release rentals. You maybe have seen this before. So let's say that I wanted to, oh wow, there's 13 hours, and I decide that I want to rent that. If I take my mouse and put it over it, see how I get that bubble that comes up? And it gives me information about the movie, and when I move off, it goes away. And then if I go to a different movie, etc. What's happening there is rather than the entire screen rewriting based on what I'm doing there, only part of the screen is rewriting. It's what's called a partial screen refresh. And a partial screen refresh is what's available to you based on Ajax. Ajax is an acronym that stands for Asynchronous JavaScript and XML. Now, XML is still used with Ajax, but just as much today probably JSON, which we talk about, I believe, in chapter 13 or 12, I don't remember, which is JavaScript object notation, is used with Ajax just as much, and some people would argue more, all right, than XML is used. All right, so maybe JSON, was that what we talked about back in chapter 10? I don't remember. 9? I don't know. But we did talk about JavaScript object notation. Now I piqued my own curiosity. Well, let's put it this way. It's it's in the book someplace. They talk about JSON. Again, JSON stands for JavaScript Object Notation. No, I don't even see it back here, but I know it's in here someplace. And we will talk about it too. But it's a new way of working with things. Okay? They're using existing technologies, but they're using them in a new way. All right. jQuery is a JavaScript library. jQuery and JavaScript are both discussed in the last chapter of the book, chapter 14. But it's a JavaScript library designed to simplify client-side scripting. In other words, there are a lot of pre-written routines, so you don't have to write as much JavaScript. All right, jQuery is an API, an application program interface. You can look at what they say right there, and the author is totally right in her definition. I look at an API, kind of for lack of better words, as a contract. All right, so the software says you're able to use all this stuff that I'm providing for you, but you agree then to use it in the right way. So you can use jQuery for a lot of things like slideshows, animation, etc. All right. Again, an API is a protocol that allows software components to communicate. There are a variety of APIs that work with HTML5. Geolocation, maybe you've done this. I've already gone out, for example, to fandango.com to check on movies. And I get asked if Fandango can have my current location. And it might want to do that so it can figure out what movie theaters are close to my current proximity. There's web storage. And what web storage is rather than having to use a database on the server side, it allows you to use the equivalent of database technology on the client side. Offline web applications, where you can take some or typically part of a website and make it available to people where they can get to it even if they don't have an internet connection. There's also Canvas, which is done for a lot of drawing type of stuff. So I mentioned the geolocation. As it says, it's used to work with longitude and latitude. I mentioned the web storage. And notice there's two types. There's local storage, which persists after the user logs out, and there's session storage that does not persist. It only stays around while the user's logged in. Offline, I've mentioned to you also. And the canvas I mentioned. It's a way that you can both draw things, and you can have both text and drawing. All right, it's a way that you can do that. Remember that when you're working with this stuff, it's of paramount importance that you account for people who have any kind of limitation, be it physical or otherwise. As it says, provide links to plugins, provide text descriptions and captions, and they should be detailed. Verify that keyboard access works. Check for screen flickering. You've got people who might use your web page that if there's a lot of flickering around, it may literally play with their mental health. Verify that if the person has JavaScript disabled, that they get some kind of a message. If the media is used for main navigation, provide plain text links. So again, this chapter was a little bit of an intro on HTML and CSS and how to use those along with audio and video. We talked about accessibility and copyright quite a bit. And as it says, the number one reason visitors leave web pages is too long of a wait for downtime. So when you're using multimedia, that can really increase the load time, the time it takes for the web page to come up. So use it, but don't abuse it. All right, so that's it for this chapter, and we'll be back with the next chapter very shortly.